All right, so we're at the bottom of Chav Tes Amud Beis 29b. We're in the middle of a mind-twisting, exciting discussion, guiding ourselves into thinking the way Hashem thinks, thinking God's thoughts in the Gemoro, understanding as best as we can. So yesterday we introduced a dispute between Rabbi Shaul, Rabbi Meir, and the sages with regard to food that is impure for having come in contact with a Tful Yoim. Tful Yoim, again, is a person who's in the process of purification, and he's in stage 1. He's Tful, he's immersed in the mikveh, but Yoim, it's still that day, there was no head of Shemesh, the sun hasn't set yet. So at this juncture, this person is pure with regard to Chulin, and impure with regard to Truma and Kachim. And the question is, how far can his impurity go with regard to Kachim, with regard to sacrificial food? Abba Shaul and Rabbi Meir both agree in principle that Kachim, sacrificial food, is capable of going to the 4th degree. That is, the original person who touched the impurity, to number 2, to number 3, to number 4. They all agree in principle that Kachim is capable of doing that. The question is, this person who has gone to mikveh in his purification process, who is now pure for Cholin but not pure for Kachim, what level is he? So Abba Shaul said that the sages Abba Shaul said that we treat the person who's gone to mikveh but the sun hasn't set yet, we treat him as if he's a number 1 as far as Kachim goes, and therefore he touches something, it becomes impure. That thing touches something else, it becomes impure, and then that thing touches something else, and it becomes impure. But that's the end. So Abba Shaul said, we take this person who's gone to mikveh, the sun hasn't set yet, and we turn him into our 1st degree. And thus, he can create 3 more degrees after. Whereas Rabbi Meir said, keep him at level 2, as he always was, and then he can, as far as Kachim goes, he can make 3 and 4. Whereas the sages said, following? The Meir and Abba Shaul both agree in principle that Kachim could reach a 4th degree.
Maybe I'm missing something, but let's say he's 1st degree, according to the sages.
No, according to Abba Shaul.
I'm sorry, according to Abba Shaul.
Mm-hmm.
He's a 1st degree, and then he touches Kachim at that point.
That becomes 2nd degree.
From 2nd degree.
And then that Kachim touches something else, makes it 3rd degree. And that Kachim touches something else, makes it 4th degree.
Oh, so it's the 4th degree status is not limited to Kachim. It could be other.
Only Kachim.
But you just said the Kachim.
The main thing is the Kachim at the end, that the Kachim can be a recipient to the 4th degree. If the second one is Truma, would also confer. It's a question of being a recipient. Right? Chulin does not become impure if it touches something that's only a 3rd degree. But Kachim will become impure if it touches something that's a 3rd degree. Whatever that 3rd degree is, whether it's Truma.
It's extended 1 degree.
That's right. It's the extended 1 degree.
For Kachim.
For Kachim, that's correct. That's right. And Abba Shaul says we turn this guy who's gone to mikveh and the night hasn't settled yet, we turn him into a number 1 as far as Kachim goes, allowing it to go 3 more degrees after. Rabbi Meir said he agrees that Kachim can become impure at the 4th degree, but he doesn't turn that person going to mikveh into a number 1. He retains his status as number 2, and therefore he can confer to another number 3, and then that to another number 4, and that's it. As far as Kachim, as far as sacrificial food goes. Whereas the sages said, no, we equate Kachim and Truma. In the same way, he is a 2nd degree. And he can only confer 1 degree forward as far as Truma goes. So likewise, he is in number 2, and he can only confer 1 degree forward as far as Kachim goes. That's what the sages said. Yeah? Clear?
So if he touches Truma,
and that becomes impure, that's it. Ends there.
And then what if that Truma touches Kachim?
Nothing. According to the sages, nothing happens.
According to the sages, nothing.
Because that's right.
Opinion, it would make it a 4th degree.
That's right. That's right. Yeah? So there's 2 questions that we're asking at once here in this discussion. Number one, we're asking, is kachim capable of becoming impure in a fourth degree? That's question number one. Can it even get to that point where a fourth degree, where sacrificial food becomes impure by fourth degree? That's question number one. Question number two is, this person who's gone to mikvah and is now waiting for nightfall, what is he? Is he degree 1 or degree 2?
Yeah, I kind of sort of
follow those two questions? Those are the two questions, yeah?
There was no degrees for people, right?
Sure, there's degrees for people, yeah. If he touched the sheretz, he's number 2.
Okay.
Yeah. Or he touched something else, whatever. He's number 2 at this point. Make sure that's right, yeah.
Things not to touch anything.
Huh? Yeah. Especially you.
Yeah. He's a number 2, said Rashi. He's a number 2. So again, so two questions going on at once. Number one, is kachim capable of fourth degree? That's question one. And question two is, what's this person considered? This person has gone to mikvah waiting for nightfall, as far as kachim, as far as sacrificial food goes. So Abba Shaul and Rabbi Meir both agree that kachim, sacrificial food, is capable of receiving on a fourth degree. They both agree with that.
But starting point.
But who's the starting point? What's the starting point for this guy? That's right. According to Rabbi Meir, right, was it?
Rabbi Meir was second.
According to Rabbi Meir, says he stays in second degree, and therefore he makes third and fourth. The sages say we turn him into a first degree. I'm sorry, Abba Shaul says we turn him into a first degree.
I made that mistake.
Yeah. The sages, however, say Truma, kachim doesn't get fourth degree. Forget fourth degree.
Doesn't get it
At least not in this case. Forget fourth degree. At least in this case.
So
and therefore,
it's equated with Truma.
It's equated with Truma. In the same way, this person comes out of the mikvah before nightfall, touches Truma, becomes impure. He touches kachim, it becomes impure, and nothing forward from there. Yeah. Now, this was the discussion we had yesterday, that we introduced yesterday. But now, what the Gemoro is discussing is, where does Rabbi Yossi follow in this? Because Rabbi Yossi earlier deduced a kal v'chomer that there is a fourth degree for kachim. So as far as that question goes, he agrees with Rabbi Yossi and Abba Shaul that there is a fourth degree.
Rabbi Meir, right?
Like Rabbi Meir and Abba Shaul. What did I say? Rabbi Meir and Abba Shaul, yes. So Rabbi Yossi must be agreeing with Rabbi Meir and Abba Shaul. Rabbi Yossi was not discussing a person who went to mikveh and came out. He was discussing in general. Can kachim receive a fourth degree? And he concluded, yes, it could reach a fourth degree. So presumably, he is equated with Abba Shaul and Rabbi Meir. For the sake of argument, we're going to say Abba Shaul. That's what the Gemara tells us to do. But Rashi says it really means any. But Rabbi Yochanan came along and said, you, Rabbi Yossi, I don't know what you're thinking. I don't understand you. Seemingly, you're contradicting the sages. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. To which the Gemara is saying, well, what's the problem? He contradicts the sages because he agrees with Abba Shaul and Rabbi Meir. So what's the problem? Rabbi Yochanan said, I don't understand you, Rabbi Yossi. You're disagreeing with the sages. And the Gemara is saying, okay, so he disagrees with the sages. He follows Abba Shaul and Meir. What's the problem? This is the Gemara. This is where we are in the Gemara right now. So what the Gemara is going to do is explain to us that the reason why Rabbi Yochanan was perplexed is because Rabbi Yossi's reasoning for how we got to a fourth degree impurity is different than Abba Shaul's reasoning. And if he follows Abba Shaul, he should have used a simpler reasoning. Clear? And therefore, it would seem clear to Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yossi does follow the sages, and thus making it a problem. How could you, Rabbi Yossi, conclude there's a fourth degree? Okay? Because Rabbi Yossi wasn't talking about Tful Yom. Rabbi Yossi wasn't talking about the person who came to mikveh, when I came out of the mikveh waiting for nightfall. Rabbi Yossi is just speaking in general about the fourth degree. Okay.
He said there was a fourth degree.
Rabbi Yossi said there was a fourth degree with respect to just any impurity. And Abba Shaul and Rabbi Meir said there's fourth degree with respect to the person who came out of mikveh. Now, with respect to the question of the person who came out of mikveh, Rabbi Yochanan argues that Rabbi Yossi must be following the sages and not Abba Shaul and Rabbi Meir. And considering that he must be following the sages, how could he conclude that there's a fourth degree?
Right, when they don't.
When they don't. So now let's see why the Gemara, this is what we're holding now. So let's see why the Gemara is compelled to assume that Rabbi Yossi follows the sages and doesn't follow Abba Shaul. So now let's go back to Rabbi Yossi. How did he conclude? What was his kavachem? What was his logic to conclude that a fourth degree impurity exists in kachim? How is that? He said like this: a person who is in the process of becoming pure, but not like the guy we discussed now, who went to mikvah and is waiting for nightfall. The guy's already out from nightfall. But he's missing now is he's waiting for tomorrow morning to bring his carbon. Yeah. So he's in stage 2 of his purification. Yeah. So we're waiting for his carbon the next day. At this juncture, he does confer impurity onto kachim, but does not confer impurity onto truma. If that's the case, if here is a person in the purification process who does confer impurity to kachim, but not to truma, then anything which is impure as far as truma goes will certainly confer impurity as far as kachim goes. And what would that be? On number 3. Any third degree impurity is impure for truma. Then certainly should confer for kachim. In the same way, this guy who's in the right, we established yesterday that we derive the process of purification. We derive the process of impurification from purification. Defilement from purification. So whatever the law is in regards to the person who's in the process of purification, it will tell us something about the process of impurification. Right? So if the person who goes through the process of purification is 3 stages: mikvah, nightfall, carbon. After mikvah, he's pure as far as regular food goes. After nightfall, he's pure for truma, but not pure for kachim. That means there's a possibility of someone who is pure for truma and yet retains impurity for kachim. That tells you that kachim is so stringent on its impurity that its impurity is susceptible even when it's pure as far as truma goes. So how much more so in the process of impurification, something which is capable of being impure for truma, certainly it's going to be impure to confer for kachim, which is a number 3 defilement, a number 3 truma, a third degree truma, except a 3 degree tuma, a third degree defilement is impure for truma. Some of the more so it can confer to kachim. That was Rabbi Yossi's logic. Yeah. Okay. So now the Gemoro is going to say, based on that, if Rabbi Yossi follows Abba Shaul, he should have had a much simpler kavachemer. Okay, this is where we are right now. Clear? So let's see, 5th to last line, the bottom of the page, Chavtesim Beis 29b.
But I thought Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that kachim then receives 4th degree.
It does, yeah.
Oh, but you mentioned 3rd degree.
The 3rd degree can confer to make the kachim a 4th degree.
Okay.
Right? Because the 3rd degree itself is impure for truma. So the more so it can confer to 4th degree.
It receives 3rd and confers.
That's right. If it itself is impure as far as truma goes, then certainly it can confer as far as kachim, making the 4th degree. If the guy who's in the purification process is totally okay eating truma and yet still confers to kachim, so much more so something that's impure for truma definitely can confer to kachim, making that a 4th. That was Rabbi Yossi's logic. So the Gemoro is now going to say that if Rabbi Yossi follows Abba Shaul, he should have used a different logic. And because he should have used a different logic, therefore, Rabbi Yochanan concludes he must be following the Chachamim. And if he's following the Chachamim, I don't understand what your problem is. According to the sages, there is no such thing as 4th degree. This is where we're going. So let's see.
Does this include a coin?
Yeah. Actually, it's most important for a kohen. It includes everybody, but it's most pertinent to the kohen because a person is allowed to be ritually impure, as all of us are ritually impure. The only issue is if you want to behave ritually, you can't do so. So how often would a Jew want to be part of? That's right. So an ordinary Jew, how often does he have to behave ritually? 3 times a year at the max. Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuos. And if he wants to bring a carbon every now and again, it's mostly concerning Pesach, right? Which is because he wants to bring the carbon Pesach, which is why we read the Parsha of Torah. We read the story of the purification process 2 weeks ago. right? Because at this point, Jews would be in the process of purification so that they can partake of the Korban Pesach. But for a Kohen, it would be much more pertinent. He wants the Truma, maybe he's got to serve in the temple. His livelihood depended on him being pure, yeah. His whole life revolved around that, yeah. I mentioned this, I don't think I mentioned this to you guys, but it's something fascinating. So just recently, in Yerushalayim, they dug up, they were digging a parking lot, I guess just for renovations. And they noticed that under the parking lot, there's archaeological finds. So they canceled the parking lot or whatever the project was, and they brought an archaeologist to start digging. And they unveiled a serious palace of some sort. They believe it belongs to a certain queen named, my name. She's a famous queen. There's streets in Jerusalem named after her. Maybe Queen Helena. It's in my mind. Anyway, they assume it belongs to her. So what do they find that's interesting? And they find this in other archaeological parks also. That all the vessels they find, cups, cups, plates, and so on, are all made of stone.
This doesn't confirm purity.
Doesn't confirm purity, which is very unusual. Doesn't receive or confer. It's very unusual. In that era, and elsewhere in the world, Rome, where they're doing digs, they're always looking for shards of earthenware. Because earthenware is usually an indicator that humans lived there and made a vessel. But here they're finding stone, and they even know there's a certain mountain outside of Jerusalem that they can see was used as a quarry from which to take that stone. And why stone, as you just mentioned? Because stone doesn't receive or impart impurity. So if you were living in Yerushalayim and your life revolved around going to the temple, selling to the temple, eating truma, your livelihood revolved around temple ritual, then you want to make sure your house and your home and your life was as least susceptible to impurity as possible. Yerushalayim was probably, I don't know, majority, but certainly a huge percentage of Kohanim. If you were a Kohen, you want to live in Jerusalem. That's where the action is. That's where it's all happening.
That's where you're probably working.
Yeah. So they all had stone, finding consistently stone vessels. It's a very fascinating thing. And I urge you to search it up on YouTube. You can find people give you tours, virtual tours of all these findings and things. It's very fascinating stuff. I like to watch these things with my kids. We like to do this. Anyway, so why does it remind me of this? Oh, you're talking about who would need the purification of the Kohanim. So this is it. Yeah, this is a whole part of life of Judaism that we're missing. Our life as Jews revolved around the synagogue. But in temple times, your life revolved around the temple. Certainly if you were a Kohen. Right?
There's much more action.
Sure, but even if you weren't a Kohen, you were busy, you're Bikudim, you're a farmer out in some town. You have to bring your fruit, your netter avoy. The fourth year, you have to eat all the produce in Yerushalayim. Your mice, certain years of Shemitah, you have to bring the tithe to Jerusalem. You have to give to a Levi, you have to give to a Kohen, you have to bring this sacrifice. Even if you were in the farmlands, your life revolved a lot around the temple, or just that kind of ritual. It was a national identity. I shouldn't say national, a religious national identity, where the land was very much associated with your ritual and your religious life and observance. The land you owned, and the fruits you produced, and all that was a very big part of your Judaism. Today, unfortunately, we don't have that whole part of Judaism. Now it's coming back because you're now living in Eretz Yisrael. Anyway.
The action is the shopping centers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. So now again, we're going back to this. So we're going to see if Rabbi Yossi followed Abba Shaul, how he should have derived this notion that there's a fourth degree for sacrificial food for kachim. Or that kachim is susceptible to fourth degree impurity. So how is that? So if you were to suggest that Rabbi Yossi followed Abba Shaul, Svirale, that's who he followed, the way he should have derived that kachim, that sacrificial food, is susceptible to fourth degree impurity, instead of deriving it from someone who is waiting for his offering tomorrow after having gone to mikveh yesterday. So he has mikveh nightfall. He's waiting for the next day offering, and he would not confer impurity to truma, and yet still confers to kachim, and therefore a number 3, which itself is impure for truma, certainly can confer to fourth degree kachim. Instead of doing that, he should have derived it from the very law of Abba Shaul. What's the law of Abba Shaul? That someone who's gone to mikveh, the night hasn't set yet, and he touches food. What happens to that food? A person, food, that has touched the person who's gone to mikveh before nightfall, its entire impurity comes from this person who's in the middle of the purification process, right? He's gone to mikveh waiting for nightfall. Now his source, the Tful Yom Gufa, this guy who came out of mikveh now, nightfall hasn't come yet, mutter b'chulin. He is allowed to eat ordinary food, as no truma conferred there, right? That's the purification process. Go to mikveh, he can eat ordinary food. Nightfall, he can eat truma. Brings carbon, now he can eat kachin. Okay, good. So this guy who's gone to mikveh, night hasn't fallen yet, he can eat ordinary food. And yet, Amris, you established Oisid Avi B'Kodesh. This is the very same guy who confers no impurity on regular food, confers 4th degree on kachin. At this point, he's gone to mikveh, he can eat cholin without any repercussion. But if he touches food, which touches kachim, that kachim is now impure. Even though he himself is allowed to eat ordinary food without any repercussion, without any pure tuma being conferred, without any impurity being conferred. Right?
If he touches cholin, then
nothing, no problem.
No problem.
And yet he confers 4th degree on kachim. If he touched truma, which touched kachim.
Wow.
Or if he touched kachim, which touched kachim, which touched kachim. Yeah? So this guy has no ramification for ordinary food, and yet 4th degree for kachim. So if that's the case, oichel shlishi, food, which itself is a 3rd degree, and where did it get its impurity from? Haba machmas sheni. It came from a 2nd degree. Yeah? The sheni gufa, this number 2, which conferred to the number 3, asur b'cholin, is forbidden for ordinary food, because ordinary food can be 2nd degree. Follow that or not? So we have 2 sources of impurity: a 2nd degree impurity, ordinary 2nd degree, right? We described this earlier. The sheretz went into the airspace of the kli cheres, of the earthenware vessel. The earthenware vessel is number 1, and the touched food, which is number 3 now. No, sorry, which is number 2 now. Yeah. So you have a number 2. You have a number 2 impurity. And then you have the guy who went to mikveh, no nightfall yet. The guy who went to mikveh, no nightfall, he can eat cholin, no problem. He can eat regular food, no impurity. Number 2 could even be cholin. In itself can be cholin, and it's number 2.
Yeah.
And yet this guy, who's totally capable of eating cholin, will confer 4th degree on kachim. So how much more so, this item, which is a number 2, it itself is impure for cholin, certainly it will confer a 3 and a 4 to kachim. So there's your reasoning to come to the conclusion there's a 4 for kachim. Instead of going to the mechusar Kapurim, the guy who had a nightfall. Nightfall came ready. He's waiting for his carbon the next day. He may not eat truma. He may, yes, eat truma, but would confer kachim. Instead of going with that guy, go a stage earlier. The guy who himself went to mikveh. He's totally pure as far as chulin goes. And yet he can make 4th degree. And how much more so, anything which is number 2, which itself which itself could be chulin, which itself could be ordinary food, and it has purity, certainly can confer 2nd and 3rd degree away from it, which would be 3rd and 4th for kachim.
This is a silly question, but is it inconceivable that they can both be correct in terms of deriving 4th degree from different points in the stages?
Yes, that's fine. That's fine. The question is, where does Rabbi Yossi stand? So Rabbi Yochanan's challenge to Rabbi Yossi is, you took a reasoning that doesn't follow Abba Shaul. It sounds more like the sages. And if your line of reasoning sounds like the sages, then you should have stayed consistent, then there is no such thing as 4th degree. Had you made your argument based on Abba Shaul's reasoning good, I would have accepted you. But you didn't didn't go down Abba Shaul's line of reasoning. You went down a line of reasoning that's more consistent with the sages. And therefore we have the question, the sages are the opinion there's no such thing as 4th degree for kachim. Clear? So then therefore.
So How do all these people know these laws? I mean, everybody wants to make a carbon, has to
So you have to think of it.
go through this process.
How does each person know the laws? You have to think of it like the laws of Shabbos. How does each person know the law of Shabbos? Not everybody does. But you overall know what you have to do on Shabbos. And when a question comes up, you go to a rabbi. Same thing would happen with the Truma.
I think even the Kohanim, many of them conferred with the sages.
All the time.
In order to know
All the time. All the time, certainly.
Even the high priest during
Absolutely. The high priest would have to consult with the Sanhedrin. That's right.
Advisors.
That's right.
So to speak.
Halachic advisory, sure. Yeah.
And that night, make sure you did everything right.
That's right. That's correct. Yes, there's a lot to remember, or think of it like the laws of family purity. Overall, I know what to do, but then I have questions. I call my rabbi. In terms of when my wife has to go to mikvah, when she doesn't have to go to mikvah, when does she have to do that, all these questions. Same thing would happen back in the day.
There must be lineups of people waiting to ask all these different questions.
So that's a good thing. So I also thought so, but then I think that's why this idea, that's what clicked in my head when it was this idea of the stone. They designed their lives in such a way that for the most part they were avoiding these questions to begin with. They designed their lives around that. So let's say a kohen was going once a year to the Beis Mikdash. So for the week before, for the 2 weeks before, whatever, he wouldn't eat anything that wasn't prepared in his own house. Maybe he would wear gloves so he doesn't touch anything. Right? He'll only eat out of earthenware glass.
Stay out of tents.
Yeah, he would do all. Yeah, exactly. In fact, Yerushalayim, just make the point. The Temple Mount is built on arches, so that that's right. So that impurity won't raise up to the above level, and if you walk around, impurity doesn't reach you. So they designed their lives in such a way that they, for the most part, they were avoiding these issues to begin with.
And bridges too.
That's right. So once you're going through the purification process, you know what to avoid to ever enter such questions, and then you're good to go. That's what I imagine. That's how much people live their life. The same way we built their lives. How many laws of there are kosher? Endless laws of kosher. How many of them do I know? Not that many. But I know to begin with how to design my life to avoid them. We have 2 separate set of dishes. We have kosher symbols. And we have separate kitchens. And therefore, for the 90% of the time, we have no problem. We just follow the system that already has factored in all the laws of kosher. And when the question comes up, I call a rabbi. So I imagine the same thing would be back in the day with Truma. With Tumah. They designed their lives in such a way that to begin with, they were avoiding 90% of these laws. When a question came up, they went. And another thing, when you look through the archaeological diggings, you find a lot. People had mikvahs in their private homes. In Yerushalayim, if you're a kohen in Yerushalayim, in mikvah in your private home, someone gives you truma. And let's say you're not the kind of impurification that requires 7-day purification because you haven't come in contact with a dead body. But there's some other impurification. Okay, so you go to mikvah, wait till nighttime, and you wait your truma. Finished. And you have mikvah in your house to take care of it. Or your neighbor's mikvah. Their whole lives were designed already, factoring in probably 90% of the laws. In the same way we've already factored in kosher to 90% of our diet, without even thinking about it. So I imagine it was a similar thing that for us it's so inconceivable because it's so out of the realm of what we do, but this was a big part of their life.
There were a lot of safeguards built in by the Rabbanim.
To begin with, yeah. I'm sure they had like, you have a kosher symbol today. You have a kosher symbol today. This restaurant is under this and this, supervision, and it's kosher. So I'm sure they had, okay, this and this store is under our supervision, that nothing is impure. And a certain rabbi, puts a stamp to this store, you'll know nothing is impure there. I'm sure they had such hechsher. I imagine, I'm guessing.
Even if it was word of mouth.
Yeah. But he knows that there's a certain guy, we trust him, he supervises these 3 stores, and you can shop there without any issue of truma. And before they let anybody in to the store, you have to be certified that you're pure. I mean, they probably had, these systems.
They have 2 stoves in their homes.
Why not?
They had communal ovens, right? And outdoors.
People had communal ovens. Depends when and where and how wealthy.
If it wasn't movable, it couldn't contract tumor, right?
If it's connected to the ground, yeah.
Yeah.
It's connected to the ground. It's carcass.
What's
Right. So they have hechsher. You probably have. So we have a restaurant. You have a hechsher. You have a hechsher on these communal ovens. I'm guessing. It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah. When we built our kitchen, we have 2 dishwashers. 2 sinks,
That's right.
2 stoves.
That's right. You built your house,
microwaves.
that's right. You built your house around keeping kosher.
Yeah.
So these guys built their houses around keeping the laws of impurity. I imagine it's the only way to do it. Otherwise, it's impossible, like you're saying. Anyway, we'll stop over here. So now at this point, the Gemara is, so at this point, the Gemara is explained why Rabbi Yochanan is perplexed by Rabbi Yossi. Because Rabbi Yossi's line of reasoning does not follow a Shal's line of reasoning. Even though they come to the same conclusion, but the line of reasoning is different. Tomorrow, the Gemara is going to suggest why perhaps Rabbi Yossi rejected Abba Shal's reasoning, even though he does not agree with the sages. And then the Gemara is going to settle and say, no, that can't be a rejection for him. He should have indeed taken Abba Shal's. He didn't. It's because he holds like the sages, and thus Rabbi Yochanan is perplexed. That's where we're going tomorrow, God willing. So we're still in this. That's going to end. Then we'll end that discussion tomorrow with that, and then begin a new discussion. Just in some ways, a lot of the things we talked about till now, with like Chulin going 1 degree, Truma going 2 degrees, Kachim going 4 degrees, and the various different degrees, and shaping it that way. More clarity, hopefully, on that coming after. Okay, have a good day, everybody.
So falling into the same trap.